can't recollect certain details? Are they going to say that's actually consistent with somebody who's being truthful? Because if you were lying, you would say, I remember every aspect of this, down to every I that was dotted and every T that was crossed. Is it going to matter, frankly, that E. Jean Carroll did not respond to the alleged assault in a way that Trump's attorney said women should respond? That's something that I think would be really interesting to see how this jury of 6 men and 3 women react, where Trump's attorney said a number of times, essentially, well, she didn't scream, she didn't do this, she didn't do that. Jurors, I believe, know that people respond to trauma in different ways, and that this kind of quote unquote typical response to trauma, there is no typical response. So will the juries believe the plaintiff's expert, E. Jean Carroll's expert, a psychologist who said, here are the different ways that people respond to trauma? Will it undercut in the jurors' minds E. Jean Carroll's claims that she was a fan of The Apprentice, that she went back to Bergdorf Goodman, the department store where the alleged assault occurred? All of those things weigh into that bigger idea that I was talking about, which is, will the jurors say there's one way that people respond to rape or sexual assault? Or will they say, different people respond in different ways, and this is more nuanced? And all of that feeds into the biggest question, which is credibility. Who do you believe?
And Jessica, I want to ask you about what happens if the jury does, in fact, return a verdict that's guilty on any of these counts. We know that the former president has announced that he intends to run again for the Republican nomination for the presidency. And for any of our viewers who are just tuning in, I actually want to just pause a moment and say that we are awaiting a verdict in the E. Jean Carroll versus Trump trial. At issue questions of battery, rape, and defamation of character, and we should get that in any moment. And as soon as we have that verdict, we will provide it to you. But going back, Jessica, to the question, if the jury returns a verdict that is guilty in a civil case, does that have any implications besides just the court of public opinion on the former president's ability to run for re-election?
No, and we should probably all get into the habit. We talk about criminal cases so much, but when it comes to a civil case, we're talking about liability. And so what are the potential legal remedies here? It's money. The former president will not be incarcerated. He will not face any jail time if he is, in fact, found liable for these 2 civil charges. One other thing to point out, and Lonnie, I think you and I have talked about this when we were on air after the district attorney in New York indicted the former president for falsification of business records. Mm-hmm. Even if in a different setting, the former president is in fact found guilty, not liable for civil wrongs, but guilty in a criminal case, that still does not mean that he's prohibited from running for president and becoming president. Now, there is one federal statute that essentially deals with insurrections. And that is involved in the January 6th investigation, a federal criminal investigation. And that statute does say that if you are found guilty under that statute, that you're prohibited from running for higher office. But I don't believe that statute can apply to the president, which is a long way of saying the civil case, the criminal case, and even the federal criminal investigation into an insurrection. I don't think any of those would bar the former president from again becoming the next president.
So, Jessica, what would damages potentially be as we all watch outside the courthouse, where you expect to hear the official announcement of the jury's decision in this case? What if it's a split decision? If they find maybe the most egregious charge of rape not guilty, but perhaps if the president is liable on the other counts, what would damages possibly look like?
So I think it would be hard in this case to come to that sort of split decision because the defamation, the allegedly defamatory statement here, is based on Trump saying, no, I didn't, and she's not my type. And she's just doing this as the, quote, big con job. This is a big hoax. And because in this case, the denial is the alleged defamatory statement, I think it would be hard for them to say, we don't think there was a sexual assault, but
Thank you for answering that question. We are getting a confirmation now that the jury has, in fact, split its decision, finding the president not guilty on the rape claim, but liable for defamation and battery. A CBS News special report on this starts now.
This is a CBS News special report. I'm Norah O'Donnell in Washington. We are coming on the air with news about former President Donald Trump, as a jury in New York has found that Trump sexually abused and defamed E. Jean Carroll and awarded her $5 million in damages. This was a civil case there that went on for the past 2 weeks. It was a quick verdict. They just started deliberating this morning. The jury also finding that Trump did not rape Carroll, but that he is liable for battery and for defamation. Want to bring in Elaine Quijano, who is there and has been covering this trial. Elaine?
Well, Nora, it took this jury of 6 men and 3 women less than 3 hours to reach its decision against the former president of the United States, finding him liable, as you said, for sexual abuse and defamation. Now, E. Jean Carroll, the writer, had alleged that Donald Trump had raped her in a New York City department store dressing room in 1996. That is a claim that Donald Trump repeatedly denied. During the trial, Carroll had said that she was too shaken at the time to report that to police, something that Trump's defense attorney, Joe Tacopina, had questioned. That attorney also had pressed Carroll on why she could not remember the exact date of the alleged assault and suggested that she only came forward in order to sell more copies of her autobiography. Now, for his part, the former president had been given the opportunity to testify during this trial here, and even suggested as recently as last week that he would cut his trip overseas short in order to do that. His attorney saying in closing arguments, though, after the former president declined to appear, his former attorney said he has no story to tell other than denying her claim. But, Nora, as you said, a surprisingly quick decision by this jury. I can tell you that the instructions to the jury this morning from the judge were quite lengthy. It was 10 questions on this verdict form that the jury had to consider. Clearly, unanimity seemed to be something that was with this group from the start, given just how quickly this decision came.
Elaine Quijano, thank you. Yes, a remarkably quick verdict from this jury. And this is the first time in history that a former president of the United States has been found liable for sexual assault and battery. Former President Trump, as Elaine noted, did not testify. However, Roberta Kaplan, the attorney for E. Jean Carroll, said that Trump was a witness against himself, in part because of that defamation tape that many of us have seen, in which the president talked about not only the Access Hollywood tape, where he boasted in the past about grabbing a woman in her sexual parts, as well as confusing who E. Jean Carroll was. Remember, the defense of Donald Trump was that E. Jean Carroll was not his type. He wouldn't have raped someone like that. And yet this picture, when he was shown this picture, that's E. Jean Carroll there on the left-hand side. He thought it was Marla Maples, his ex-wife. He seemed confused when he was then pointed out, even by his own attorney, that no, that's the accuser, E. Jean Carroll. Then he said, well, it's blurry. But as Roberta Kaplan, the attorney, said, Trump lied. That picture wasn't blurry. Let's bring in CBS News legal analyst Ricky Kleeman. I know, Ricky, you have been covering this trial from the beginning. Your take about how this jury was able to deliberate so quickly.
Well, there was only really one question for this jury, Nora, and that was, did they believe E. Jean Carroll? And when you look at E. Jean Carroll's testimony, you're really looking at the testimony not only of one woman, you're looking at the testimony of 5 women. Because what you have is the plaintiff, E. Jean Carroll, and her story about what she says happened to her around 1996. but you're also looking at two what we call fresh complaint witnesses, people she told right at that particular time. And you're also looking with two other victims who told a very similar story, not only to E. Jean Carroll, but it is the story of the Access Hollywood tape. It's precisely the same story 3 times. So the worst witness against Donald Trump was Donald Trump, because they had the Access Hollywood tape, as you pointed out, and in his own deposition, it was really somewhat of a disaster when you have someone who says, if you're a star, fortunately, you can do what I talked about. And those are the kind of statements where a jury could not possibly see that 5 women were lying. Real issue, Nora, for me, is how much money.
That's right. And as we're hearing right now, it could be about $5 million that the former president liable for. I do want to ask you, though, Ricky, they did find him not liable for rape, but they did find him liable for sexual battery. What does that mean?
Well, it could mean a lot of things, Nora. It could mean that there was a compromise in the jury room about what actually happened, about how they thought about her description. She was very, very emphatic about the use of his finger and the pain that it caused. And a lot of her memories were about that finger. Now, in many jurisdictions, that kind of penetration of the vagina by a finger would also be considered rape. But perhaps this jury felt differently. There is no doubt that they saw and heard enough to say, well, perhaps it wasn't rape for all kinds of extraneous reasons. But nonetheless, they felt that one question down, they could find it a sexual abuse. They didn't go further down the list of the judge's lesser included offenses, as we lawyers would say. But sexual battery is a forcible touching plus more.
And Ricky, we should note, too, this is a civil case, not a criminal case. And so the burden of proof is different. Explain.
In a criminal case, the burden of proof is to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. That's a huge burden. As I often say on the scales of justice, it's right at the top of the scales that you would have to believe the evidence beyond a reasonable doubt. So if you suspected, if you get, that wasn't enough. But in a civil case, the burden is preponderance of the evidence. Nora, that's like putting a feather on the scales of justice. It's about 51%.
It's an excellent way to describe it. Ricky Kleeman, thank you so much for your expertise. Want to bring in our chief Washington correspondent, Major Garrett. And Major, Donald Trump is running for president again. What is the political effect of this?
So not only is Donald Trump running for the Republican nomination, he's the front runner. He's right now the undisputed front runner. And by all polling data measured recently, a very, very strong likely Republican nominee. The political effect of this will come out over time, but this trial was in fact a character sketch of the former president. And his attorney said, you could say that former President Trump is rude and crude, but he didn't do these specific things. Also arguing, by implication, these would be out of character for the former president. The jury did not agree with that. The jury said, as a matter of fact, based on all the things presented to us, this is precisely the character. Now, those on the political side of former President Trump would say, you know what? That was adjudicated in the 2016 election. The country looked at this character sketch and said, you know what? It's okay. We'll elect him president. That character sketch now comes back with very real procedures in a legal courtroom and an assignment of a fine against former President Trump. So that character question now is raised in a very different context. And there's been a proceeding, an adversarial one, where Donald Trump had every opportunity to defend himself in person, looking at across that courtroom at E. Jean Carroll. He did not do that. His attorneys did not want him to do that. So the character sketch that emerges from this civil proceeding will have real political impact.
Donald Trump's attorneys will no doubt appeal this particular ruling, but this is the first time that a jury has found a former president of the United States liable for sexual abuse and battery in this case. And as has been noted, this in many ways, in addition to a character test, this was also a matchup between two different types of attorneys, where Donald Trump didn't show up, Joe Tacopina, his attorney, didn't present much of a defense. And in fact, really the only evidence out there was Donald Trump's own deposition, which ended up being quite damning.
As Ricky Kleeman pointed out, the former president said, fortunately or unfortunately, but that fortunately word hangs out there predominantly. Fortunately, for years and years, the former president said millions of years, it clearly wasn't that long, men have been allowed to get away with this. Fortunately?
By grabbing a woman, yeah.
Yes, in an unwanted, battery-type, aggressive way.
He almost admitted to it.
Precisely. And in 2016, I remember it well. I covered it hour by hour by hour. It was still kind of an abstraction. Oh, he talks this way. He said it was locker room talk. He would never act this way.
The Access Hollywood tape.
Yes. That's not the context any longer. A jury looking at all the facts said, no, that probably did happen. Was it rape? We have no way of knowing that for sure, but we know something bad, something unwarranted and unwanted, unwelcome happened. And then the former president lied about it. That's the defamation part of it. Oh, and to compound the factual inaccuracies perpetuated by this former president, this morning, on social media, he said he was unconstitutionally silenced in this proceeding. That is a complete lie. He was given every opportunity. The judge provided 3 more days in case the former president wanted to testify. That's not unconstitutional silencing. That is a strategy that failed.
It really is an interesting case in many ways because the attorney, Roberta Kaplan, for E. Jean Carroll, who is quite skilled, pointed out that Trump lied multiple times. He had said, I never met E. Jean Carroll, but then there was the picture, and then he confused her with his ex-wife, Marla Maples. Trump said, well, I'd never been to Bergdorf Goodman's, the department store in New York, and Roberta Kaplan said, well, he lied because we've got someone testifying that he frequently visited the store. Trump lied when he said that the photo was blurry. Here, look at the photo. It's quite clear. Anybody can see there. It's a clear picture. So it was, again, in many ways, saying that Trump cannot be believed in this case. And that is usually, it's usually sometimes the one who makes the accusation is not believed.
Precisely. The forcefulness of the former president's denials evaporated up against all of his other misrepresentations and inaccuracies and strategic lies.
Major Garrett, thank you. And just to recap, a jury in New York has found former President Donald Trump liable for sexual abuse and defamation in a civil case, awarding the former columnist E. Jean Carroll nearly $5 million in damages. I want to thank Elaine Quijano and Ricky Kleeman. Our coverage will continue on CBS News Streaming, your local news, and we're going to have a full wrap-up of what this all means tonight on the CBS Evening News. This has been a CBS News Special Report. I'm Norah O'Donnell in Washington.
When I think about growing up in Evanston, a lot of it is family. It's a real foundational feeling that's never left me. I love the commitment to surviving winter. I love the drive to always be better. I love the passion for our sports teams, taking advantage of those last warm days of summer. There's endless opportunity here to learn about each other. I feel that in this city. And I do still pinch myself when I'm driving in on Kennedy and see the skyline, unless there's terrible traffic.
The CBS 2 First Alert Weather Team keeps you prepared day and night. Start your day with meteorologist Laura Bannon.
Whether it's severe weather that can change your life or inconvenient weather that can change your day, you'll know before you head out the door.
And end your day with Chief Meteorologist Albert Ramon.
We make sure you know what weather's headed your way tomorrow, so you'll be prepared before your head hits the pillow tonight.
Keeping you prepared around the clock. The First Alert Weather Team, only on CBS 2.
I want you to find. I believe in not just talking about change, but being part of the change. And how I think you do that is you impact.
At that point, it didn't do the former president any good to actually show up.
Or I actually have another theory that the deposition was, in fact, really damaging, but that the former president's attorney, Joe Tacopino, decided, I think rationally, that live testimony could have been even worse. Having Donald Trump up on the stand in front of the jury and having Roberta Kaplan, who is arguably one of the most skilled attorneys in our nation, be able to cross-examine him, I think would have potentially been the end of the case. Not that the case wasn't already over, but that would be a huge risk for somebody like the former president, who has very real and very big credibility issues. And there is still a little distance when the jury sees him say, oh, well, maybe the photograph is blurry, or that's Marla, oh, no, it's not. There's a little distance when it's on a video. If he's right there lying to them, I think that could arguably be even worse for him. And I'm not sure, frankly, that it was the wrong calculation. Even though he lost, maybe the jury would have deliberated for 30 minutes instead of 3 hours if he had testified.
Jessica Levinson giving us her legal perspective on this breaking story. Jessica, stand by for us. We want to connect now with...
Oh, it does look like E. Jean Carroll has just walked out, though. If this is a live
I think our Elaine Quijano is there. Elaine, can you tell us what you're seeing? Or perhaps let's listen in to Carroll's response to the jury's decision.
It does look like she just walked past those microphones that we have been watching for so long, deciding not to speak then.
Elaine
Quijano, the people who were gathered.
Elaine hear us? And if so, tell us what you're seeing.
I hear you. I hear you. We are across the street from where E. Jean Carroll appears to be speaking right now. Looks like, or at least it looks like perhaps she may be getting in a vehicle. It's a bit hard to tell from our vantage point, but as you can imagine, an enormous amount of attention here, given the prominence of this particular case. This jury of 6 men and 3 women took less than 3 hours to come to this decision. Remarkably quick decision, finding the former president of the United States, Donald Trump, liable for sexual abuse and defamation. What we had been anticipating is that perhaps it might take a little while to go through all 10 of the questions that were on this verdict form. Some background on this: E. Jean Carroll had alleged that Donald Trump had raped her in a New York City department store dressing room in 1996. Donald Trump had repeatedly denied that. And during the trial, Carroll had explained that at the time of this alleged attack, she was too shaken to really report what happened to police, something that Joe Tacopino, Donald Trump's defense attorney, repeatedly questioned. As I continue to look around just to see if there are any attorneys who may be wanting to speak, I see members of E. Jean Carroll's defense team, E. Jean Carroll's legal team actually speaking with our colleague Graham Cates right now. But what I can tell you from one of our fellow colleagues, Claire Himes, who was there in the courtroom actually as the jury's decision was read, apparently after the jurors left the courtroom, E. Jean Carroll turned and embraced her lawyers. As you can imagine, this has been an extremely emotional case. There has been extremely graphic and explicit testimony, including today, I should point out, the instructions from the judge in separating out the various elements of what constitutes sexual battery and the various kind of legal definitions in the context of a civil trial. It was quite graphic and explicit to hear that. And at one point, the Judge Kaplan, even said, apologies for being this explicit, essentially. But he said, I have no choice in talking about these various questions that they have to consider. But the judge afterwards thanked these jurors, these 6 men, these 3 women, who we should mention have remained anonymous throughout the course of this trial. The judge called it an important and hard task, the one that was set before them, and called it really the bedrock of the system to have jurors come and listen to testimony and determine, based on the evidence presented in court, whether or not there was liability in this case. Now, the judge also advised these jurors not to identify themselves, and then he ordered them not to identify other jurors. So a great deal of direction with respect to what should happen and what the judge would recommend with respect to these jurors jurors identifying themselves. One more thing that we should mention, it's not clear right now whether or not Donald Trump's lawyers, led by Joe Tacopina, plans to appeal at this point. But certainly we're waiting to see if any of the attorneys in the case on either side make statements, and we'll, of course, bring those to you as soon as they happen.
Feel free at any moment, Elaine, to direct us where you want to go as we continue to cover this breaking reaction. One detail to share is that E. Jean Carroll's also driving away with $5 million. Go ahead. You've got something to mention?
Well, I was just going to say that Claire Himes, my colleague here, intrepid colleague, is keeping an eye on Donald Trump, what he has been saying in response to this trial and now after a decision. He just posted moments ago, I have absolutely no idea who this woman is. This verdict is a disgrace. He called it a continuation of the greatest witch hunt of all time. Now, again, it is worth underscoring there was, in addition to the sworn deposition that you talked about from October of 2022, that the jurors had available to consider, in which Donald Trump denied knowing E. Jean Carroll, denied ever attacking her. He was given ample opportunity by the judge in this case, Judge Kaplan, to come and testify here in the course of the trial. In fact, the judge extended that deadline to Sunday night so that Donald Trump, who had been overseas and suggested at one point he was going to cut his trip short and come over and testify, he declined to do that. And so that deadline of Sunday night came and went. Closing arguments happened on Monday. Tuesday morning, this morning, jury instructions were given by the judge. And now here we are, less than 3 hours after they first went back to deliberate with that decision. Remarkable turn of events in quite a short period of time, frankly. People who have been watching this case and looking at the verdict form and the considerations that the jurors had to kind of factor in are all in agreement that it's pretty remarkable just how quickly this decision came.
Very quick. Our colleague Elaine Quijano there outside of the courtroom. We have just learned that the jury has found the former president liable for battery as well as for defamation of character in the civil suit that was brought by E. Jean Carroll regarding sexual battery that took place in the 1990s. I want to bring back for us now Jessica Levinson. Jessica, we saw E. Jean Carroll walking out, smiling from that courtroom, presumably happy that she has been vindicated. But we, as Elaine mentioned, the former president says that this is a witch hunt, and he repeats that he still doesn't know who, quote, that woman is. Does he have any recourse now?
No, I mean, that's a lie. And his claim that he wasn't allowed to testify or that he was silenced or that he couldn't present a defense is also a lie. And Elaine, with excellent reporting, reminded us that the judge essentially bent over backwards to allow the former president to testify. He asked over and over again, will Trump be attending? Will he be testifying? And then when out of court, the former president said, well, maybe I'm going to cut my vacation short and go and defend myself. The judge said, okay, let me give you some additional time on top of the time I already gave you to let me know if, in fact, you will be coming into court. And he declined. So the idea that he was not afforded process in this case is really just, there is no there. I mean, I don't use these terms lightly, but that is in fact a lie. Now, does he have any recourse? I mean, he can, of course, appeal. I will say that appeals are typically rarely granted. We all have the jury instructions. I looked at them this morning. I looked at the jury verdict form. Nothing jumped out at me as grounds for appeal. I'm sure that there will be certain evidentiary rulings that the former president's team potentially tries to appeal. But again, I would be very surprised if this verdict is in fact overturned.
Now, we can't really overstate just the enormity of a moment like this for a woman like E. Jean Carroll, a survivor of abuse, to make this claim publicly despite being fearful of coming forward against such a powerful man. She now, the jury has decided, is walking away with $5 million in damages. How does that money move? And are there avenues for a litigious former president, to avoid or slow down the payment of that money as much as possible? What happens here, financially speaking?
Well, financially speaking, I think it's very similar to what his litigation strategy is, which is to delay, delay, delay. Now, I do think it's worth pointing out, and Errol, you said this so well, this is a historic moment. This is a historic first, that for E. Jean Carroll, and I think this is why her attorneys did not ask for a specific amount, the victory really is the conclusion. The victory is a jury saying unanimously, we think there was defamation, and we think that there was sexual battery. Is that the same as having your day in a criminal court? Absolutely not. But it is what can be afforded to her at this point, almost 2 decades later. Now, can the former president try to slow down providing this $5 million? Of course. And you could see, absolutely, you could see litigation about where is the payment? We require the payment. That's something, frankly, that is common. A lot of this is not common, but common throughout courthouses throughout the country is that it can sometimes be difficult to get unsuccessful defendants to pay. But we have remedies for that. I mean, we have a whole area of the law that is dedicated to that. It could take a while, but I suspect that the former president will be forced to pay.
Jessica, I just want to ask a clarifying question on that. We know that Trump has fundraised off of the other legal cases that he has been embroiled in. Does he personally have to pay the $5 million, or can he crowdsource a legal fund that comes up with this compensation that goes to E. Jean Carroll? Is it possible that he never pays a cent of his own money?
So yes, that is possible. But what I would say, without getting too much into the weeds of federal election campaign law, is that you can, as a private person, you can absolutely fundraise and say, I have to pay this verdict. I mean, we've all seen GoFundMe, for instance, where people say, I have to pay my rent, I have to pay for these terrible medical expenses, or I have to pay this or that. If the former president tries to fundraise for this as part of his candidacy, then I think we have some legal questions here. But you're absolutely right that I believe, or my understanding is under the applicable law, that he can say, friends, I need a check. I need this $5 million. I shouldn't have to pay this. That is different from it coming from a type of account where you need to report to the FEC.
Jessica Levinson, doing what we're asking you to do, walking us through kind of the legal weeds and the intricacies of such a case and the consequences. We appreciate that. We do want to reconnect with our Elaine Quijano outside the courthouse, because to zoom out, Elaine, this is an historic moment for a former president, the Republican frontrunner, to be delivered this type of verdict. You saw, as E. Jean Carroll was coming out of the courtroom, that crowd of reporters around her as she drives away effectively with $5 million in damages. Can you speak to us about just the enormity of this moment?
Yeah, and you know, we have to mention as well that over the course of this trial, E. Jean Carroll, through her lawyers, made it clear, and even said herself, that this was not about the money. That all along, this was about her name and getting that back. This was something that was not in her legal team's kind of position, in her position, meant to seek out a specific financial amount. Instead, it was about, according to her team and to her, about being believed. And so it was interesting to note this atmosphere surrounding this trial. There were points where you did see supporters of E. Jean Carroll who would come in the morning and be here for her arrival. Sometime in the 8 o'clock hour, court would begin in the 10 a.m. Eastern hour, but they were here with signs. You could hear them at various points saying things like, "We believe you." And E. Jean Carroll said herself that the reason she wanted to pursue this was not just for herself, but for other survivors of sexual abuse, sexual assault. And so that moment for her is difficult to fathom, given, again, the emotional, graphic, painful, clearly, testimony that we saw during the course of this trial. For them now, and for she and her legal team, to walk away understanding that a jury here in New York City believed her and did so in a way that rendered a very quick verdict with these damages, the compensatory and punitive damages. Clearly does send a message, and she has talked about the toll that this has taken, going public against the former president of the United States. But now, obviously, a moment of vindication for her, many, many years in the making.
Many years in the making, but only 7 days in the courtroom. A very speedy trial. We want to thank our own Elaine Quijano and Jessica Levinson. We will continue to monitor all of this.
That's right. Standing by to hear from either legal team. If they come out and speak to the press, of course, we will bring that to you live and in real time. But it seems, though, for the moment, E. Jean Carroll has cleared her name after building her career as an advice columnist. She walks out of this courtroom today mostly successful on what she had accused the former president of. We're going to stay on this story, of course, and there will be much more in moments on America Decides at 5 p.m. Eastern tonight, right here on CBS News. We're going to take a very short break. Stay where you are. We'll be right back.
Two weeks ago.